Now I want to clean this up and show my content here. So first for this, I am going to import browser router as router. Next, I am going to import app router. I think I have not exported it yet. Yeah, yes. App route. As you all know, app route is going to return all of these path. It is just specifying here when I specify this particular path, render the home page. If I specify React book, render React book page, and cloud books, render the cloud book. For this, next what I wanted to import in app.tsx is import.css and finally import query client comma query client provider from Tanstack React Query. Before moving further, let's take a moment to understand what is Query Client and Query Client Provider are. Once we cover that, we will come back and continue the coding. As we discussed previously, we know React help you fetch, cache, synchronous, update data from your APIs in your React app without manually managing loading, error, or refresh logic. So, to make it work, you first set up two things. One is query client that create and manage the data cache, and next query client provider makes the client available to your whole React app. So what this actually means is that I showed you previously, like I used use query to make a cache and fetch a API call. But to make it actually work, we need to first wrap our whole application into query client provider. So once after that, we will be passing a instant call query client. This query client will create and manage the data caching. So only if these two things are being set up, we can do all this like fetching, caching, and synchronizing data. And we don't want to do anything manually like loading, error, or refresh logic. Now, let's take a look at the query client and query client provider. These are two core parts of React query that help us connect everything together. So, query client. A query client is an object that stores and manages all the query data. So, you need only one per application, usually created once at the root. So here we will be doing like this: import query client provide, which we have already done. Next, we have to create a client instance. So before we move further, let's see how to define and set up the query client in our project. Now first I am going to create the instant called constant query client that is equal to new query client. This is something like I can say I am creating a client instance. So it handles caching API data, background refetching, deduplicating requests, retrying failed requests. So if two components request the same data, React Query fetch it only once and shares it. Continuing with the coding. And finally, the component constant app. So yeah. So if you see here, query client provider. So query client provider is generally allow you to access this query client you have created to your whole application. All right, let's check out query client provider. The query client provider is a React component that wrap your whole app and provide access to the query client you created. It makes the client available to React context so you can use React query hooks like use query, use mutation anywhere inside your app. What it means is that query client, what it does, it creates an instance and help you to fetch the data, cache the data and all this. So first thing, to use query, you should first create a client instance. So that is been done using query client. And next, to make it available to your whole application, you need one more thing that is called query client provider. So this is something again like a context API. So that allow you to make use of React query hooks anywhere inside your app. Let's save this file and start the project in the terminal. Now click the link and open the browser. This is the main page that app.tsx is returning. We got a good understanding of how cached data actually work. Now let's see that in the action. Here I am going to show you how React query cache the data. If you remember from earlier, I mentioned that React query cache the data once it is fetched. Now if you look at the home page code, you will see that I am returning both React book page and Cloud book content. But when we first load the home page, you will notice there is nothing shows up. There is no Cloud book content or React book content. So what does that mean? It means that initially there is no any cache data. Only after we make a fetch request, React query store the data in the cache. So now if you see here, I don't have any cache data. I am making a fetch request. So once after I am making a fetch request and see React query automatically serve the cache data, which is why we see the React book content without fetching it again. And the same behavior apply for Cloud book page as well. Once the data has been fetched, React query keeps it cached for us. So right now this looks like we written the code and on click it's returning a data, but it feels more like simple render, right? We need to see this in action, bit more clear with a better understanding of what's actually happening. So what I'm going to do is add few small operations inside our code. So first in the home page, I will define a number and assign it a value using math random constant home page content. Yeah, export. So here I'll tell welcome. No, I don't want this one. I'll write random number and here I'm going to define a random value. So curly braces math dot random. Okay, I'm going to save this and next similar to this list, I'm going to add one more list for home. I will create an active section so that when I click on home, it shows the random value. Let's save and run the application. Now, if you refresh the page or click a different action, so I am first clicking home, you see 15 as a random number. Now, next I am going to click a different section like React Book or Cloud Book and then come back to home. You will notice that the value change instantly without any delay. Now I'll do the same thing for React book price and Cloud book price. I'm going to add math random there as well. So each time I click on the different section, it will generate a new price. And of course, we'll wrap it with math flow to round it off and make it look cleaner. Now let's add math random and math floor operation to React book with ID 1. And the same thing I have done for cloud book as well. And I'm keeping it only for the first book. Like ID 7, I have not added to ID 9. Similarly, here ID 1, I have not added it to ID 2 or 3. You can add if you want, but I am keeping it simple and adding it only to the first book. So save the application and coming back to the browser. If you notice that the home page showing an instant random number as soon as it loads, keep that in mind for a moment and pause here. Key features we talked about earlier. The first one was automatic caching, which help prevent unnecessary requests. The next was background fetching, which automatically refresh data behind the scene to keep it up to date. Finally, we also know that it updates the UI instantaneously on user action. Coming back, take a closer look. Initially, I'll click this React Books. Now, this React book is going to have a random value $29. Keep this in mind. Now, coming back to the home page, the math random value on the home page is going to update instantly. Okay, you have noticed that. But for React book now, if you see, the $29, it took a second. Initially, it showed the cached value and then it updated to a random value after a short delay. You can take a look at it once again. Now we have $83. I am going to click the cloud books and now I'm again going to click the React books. So $83 took a second. So what that means, the $83 is a cache data took a second. So this means it is refetching in the background and showing the fetch data. So that is second point, and finally updating the UI instantly. So I think this would be a perfect demonstration of what we learned earlier. React query first show the cache data, then refetch in the background and finally update the UI automatically once the new data is available. The same thing you can take a look in CloudBook as well. Now remember this value $90. I am going to click on CloudBooks $15. Now again I am going to click on React Book. From $90 it took a second and changed it to 45. Similarly, the same thing happened. It took a second from 15 and changed it to 11. So let's have a quick glance at what we have covered related to key feature, like a API call, easily fetch data with hooks like use query and use mutation, work with any async source. And then about the caching, and later on about the background fetching, updating the UI instantly, refetching data at interval on window focus or when network reconnect. So what this actually mean? Along the way, you might also remember I have mentioned the stale time. All of these are part of use query configuration. So let's take a closer look at each of these and understand what they actually do in React Query. Like window focus, network reconnect, stale, and there are also few more configuration. We'll take a look on each of these. Finally, we have one more key feature, that is shipping with the excellent debugging panel. We can take a final look into this. So, window refocus. If the user switch away from your app and then come back, the tab refocus. So React queries silently refetch in the background to ensure the freshness. This one, even if we don't configure, by default it is going to be true. Here I'll write the refetch on window focus. Even if you don't explicitly set refetch on window focus, React query will automatically refetch the query whenever user focus back on the browser tab as long as the data is stale. This means keep your UI up to date without manual intervention. So even if I write this or don't write this, it means the same. Next is refetch on reconnect. So similar to window refocus, even network reconnect doesn't need to be explicitly specified. Either I write this or comment it out, it is going to work by default as true. So this option control whether a query automatically refetch when the browser regain network connectivity. So if the user lose network and come back online, React Query will try to refetch the stale query automatically. So here if I write refetch on mount is true, or if I don't write, it is going to work in the same way. Next, we can learn about stale data. So, React Query marks the cached data as stale after a given stale time. So, I can say by default, similar to window refocus or network reconnect, we don't need to specify stale time. But stale time is automatically considered as 0. So, now if in the code I write stale time is for 5 minutes. As I mentioned earlier, refetch on window focus and refetch on reconnect are by default set to true. This means React query will automatically try to fetch fresh data whenever the window gains focus or the network gain. Usually, no one set this to false because most of the time we want to have the latest data. So either you include or don't include, it's up to the user requirement. So now coming to the stale time, as I showed you previously, stale time by default will be 0. But sometimes we might not want to use the default value which is 0. For example, maybe I want my cache data to be considered fresh for 1 minute. So let's set it up. I'll keep it for 1 minute. Now, if we go back to our application in the browser, first I am clicking a home page, a random number, then coming to React book. If you see, the React book value is 92. Now I'm going to home page. Previously you would have seen when I click now React book, it takes a second and then switch to a fresh data. So now it doesn't happen like this. It's 92. This is going to be 92 until 1 minute is going to complete. So let's wait. Now it's 13:24. Let's wait for 1 minute and see it's going to take the fresh data after 1 minute. So what it means is that even though fresh data is available, I want to show the cache data for 1 minute. At that scenario, we can use tail time. Now I am going to switch back to home, come back to React Books. See, after 1 minute, it changed it from 97. See, now I'm clicking the React Book 20. So for 1 minute, now it's correctly 13:27. You switch for n number of time from to different sections and come back to React Book, it's going to be 20. For 1 minute, this value, even though you're switching to a different section, coming back, we included random, this is going to show only the cache data. See, I switched to Cloudbook, coming back to React, it is 20. It doesn't change at all. But let's see now. Now it's 13:28. I started in the mid of 13:27. So let me take a few more seconds and switch back to home. See? Yeah. So next we'll look into manual or programmatic invalidation. So generally I have told you previously, like once we do a API call, next time we don't want to write the repetitive code. Instead we can just use query client and make use of this cache data. So here what this manual or programmatic invalidation do? I mean what this invalidate query does is that when you know the data is cached, like when the data will be cached, when we perform some CRUD operation like updating the data or deleting the data or some inputting some kind of data, you can tell React query to invalidate this query. That is, we are telling say that the cache data is invalid and refetch the latest one. So we can just write this. We'll call this function and we'll call query client dot invalidate query. So this is going to fetch us the new data. So we can configure this kind of value as well. Refetch on mount, and this is again the same thing, it's going to be by default on mount. So it control whether a query should refetch its data when the component mount, that means when it render, if the data is stale. By default React query will refetch on mount if data is stale. So if I specify something stale time as 2 minutes, then this is not going to work. So we have to configure properly. So when refetch on mount is there, we have to not include stale time. So refetch interval makes the query automatically refetch at a fixed interval. So after every 5 seconds, it refresh the interval. So stale time mainly affect other automatic triggers like refetch on mount, refetch on window focus, refetch on reconnect. But refetch interval ignore the stale time by default. It just fetch periodically. Stale time mainly affects some triggers. So I can say they are refetch on mount, refetch on window focus, refetch on reconnect. But it doesn't affect refetch interval because refetch interval ignores stale time by default. Why is that so? See, refetch on mount. So as I showed you previously, every time I go to another section and come back, even though it rendered because of the stale time, it did not show up the random digit for 1 minute. Similarly, refetch on window focus or on reconnect. So either network reconnect or window focus, if we have a stale time that's not expired, it's not going to show up the fresh data. But whereas refetch interval will ignore all of this and fetch a periodical fresh data every time. So sometimes, as I mentioned previously, user don't configure any of this so that one doesn't get affected from other. But in some scenario, we need to take care of what need to be included in the configuration accordingly. I hope this video has given you a small understanding of how to create a project, set up the routing, understand the file extension, and get started with React Query. If you want to explore further, you can clone my repo and check out the full workflow. Also, I have the documentation which cover almost everything we have discussed in this video. That is for this tutorial. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.